must be skeptical of absolutely everything. Above all, this is a war of propaganda.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
You only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes, plenty of evidence. I
strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers.
Now, of course I am minimising my tax, and if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads ripped. Because as a government, I can tell you, you're not spending it that well that we should be donating extra.
The easy answer is this. If we continue to send our children to Caesar for their education, we need to stop being surprised when they come home as Romans.
We are live, episode 12, Fringe Frequencies. I am Jase and and this is Cody Welcome to another episode. We're back on fortnights. Few snivels, lots of flus, but we're going to keep going with this. And we are with our friend David this evening to speak about mental illness, families, how that's affected us, and I guess our ideas around treatment and longevity and prognosis, etc. So thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
No, look, it's good. I mean, it was good to meet you guys this evening when you picked me up.
Well, look, we'll let you introduce yourself. You can certainly share whatever you want to share, but please tell us who you are.
So my name's Dave. I live in Toolanvale, on a nice property with my wonderful wife and 4 kids. I have an unsettled view of this subject.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting subject because I think a lot of people experience it, and a lot of other people have opinions on other people's experiences. Yeah.
So we obviously asked you on tonight to discuss mental illness. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's people who have had experiences with it, and people who are very intimately know how it can affect your life, and then there's those who without experience make, in my opinion, some pretty bold statements on it. Look, I would also say I'm a bit unsettled on the matter with regards to where some of my beliefs stand. But if you can, answer whatever you want to answer, what has been your experience with mental illness specifically?
Wow.
In other words, where do you start?
Yeah.
So yeah.
My I guess my foray into it was my mother's brother discovered that his wife had been having an affair, and he gassed himself in his garage. My mother suffered from a condition called body morphic disorder, which you could probably, in today's terms, categorically compare to the concept of transgenderism in young kids. What it is in the most simplistic sense is that the person struggles with their comprehension of what their body looks like. And so as a young child, probably from about the age of 9, my mother locked herself in a bedroom. And so we would see her sometimes once every 6 months because she was so unwell. And this went on for years. This went on for absolute years. During that time, my sister became quite unwell, and she developed an eating disorder. There's a 60% probability of a young girl that develops an eating disorder to eventually commit suicide. It's a very high probability. I think my father at the time was very concerned about that. So my father and my sister and my brother were coming back from church one day. And came home to the house being completely vacated. Mum had bailed. She'd up and left. And I think that really affected my sister a lot. Mum suffered seriously from depression, I think, as well. And look, she has been on an incredible amount of drugs. Seropax, Sericol, sleeping tablets, Valium, I mean, just because it's legal, just because the pharmaceutical industry has got some approval from some bought-off institution somewhere, it doesn't make it any different, in my opinion, to, regularly smoking a splint or...
illicit drugs.
Yeah, correct, yeah. The only difference is someone hasn't paid off the piper. So anyway, my sister experienced abuse one day from an old guy down the road, and that really amplified her anorexia nervosa, her depression. And so she went on the path of getting psychological help. She saw a shrink for several years. It's interesting because we were talking before about the concept of it being a spiritual war versus it being a physical thing. And it being a spiritual war was the position my father has always taken. So she got better, and she actually became a youth leader.
Wow.
And was very good at that. Looked great. She was doing very well. She was very healthy.
Sorry, can I just quickly ask, when you say youth leader, you mean like a secular youth counselor, or do you mean like in a
like
church,
so my family at that point were members of the Salvation Army.
Okay. Yep.
And so my sister became a youth leader for that segment of the community, and I think really very much enjoyed it. She also did a degree in theology. I actually think that did a huge amount of harm to her and her spiritual walk, to be honest. She came out. I remember when she first started, she told me that everything in the Old Testament is a metaphor.
Yeah, the Jordan Peterson view.
I'm like, are you learning this? Is that your course? And literally every concept was being pulled apart, dissected, and redigested. And I think that really had a significant impact on her. Anyway, one day she tried to gas herself in her car, and going back before we get to that point, she was very, very close with me. We had a very, very good relationship, and she actually helped me with my wife, who was sick in hospital. She gave me access to her university's database, so I had unlimited access to PubMed and used that to deal with the hospital and stuff. And she was amazing. So my daughter was suffering from anxiety and depression. I said to my sister, "Listen, can you come and sort of play a bit of a mentoring role to my daughter?" And my sister said, "Oh, look, I don't think so. I don't know how long I'm going to be here for." And that's a strange thing to say. And so we had a conversation about it, and she said, look, she was going to end her life. At that point, she was a professor at Monash, and she had completely lost any belief in a creator. She had completely lost any faith in humanity. She believed that, this wasn't some, two atoms spiraling in nothing that randomly hit each other. But beyond that, she sort of was very cynical about everything she believed.
And this was after theology studies?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was she bordering on nihilism? realistic.
She told me she told me that that was her position, and that she was also she would consider herself now a nihilist. So essentially, she went down this path of getting additional drugs to deal with her sense of depression and hopelessness. They put her on Zoloft. They put her on lithium, which to me is kind of, I always thought you just put that in batteries. And one day she was in her car and she got I won't tell you how, but she basically gassed herself in a car. And during that process, I think she might have had a second thought, and she sent a message to her husband saying, "Listen, this is what I'm going to do." And so he got the police involved and stuff, and they came out and rescued her. So when she was in the hospital, and I went and saw her, we had this massive argument. And I said to her, "Look, at the end of the day, if you're just going to try and get attention, right, this is the worst thing you can do because of the harm that you're causing the family and everything else." And she looked at me with the most vile disgust that I have ever seen. Anyway, about five months after that, and in the meantime, the Victorian government were doing a trial of ketamine, Special K, which is essentially at the time she was one of the very first trials. They decided that it'd be really good to give ketamine to people like my sister because of her mental health problems and that sort of thing. And about 5 or 6 months after that first attempt, she succeeded in taking her life. She locked herself into one of her holiday houses in Torquay that her and her husband had been working on, and then sent a letter via email that had been pre-scheduled. So we all got hit with this letter about the fact that this is what she was going to do. And I think, and I still struggle with this because she addressed everybody in the family in this letter, but made an intentional point of missing me and my brother. And my brother and I had both been quite hard on her when she did this, and told her that we thought that this was just a call for help and she needed to grow up. But it wasn't. So, so she's gone to the grave, and I suppose that's, for me, been one of my greatest regrets. Yeah. On the other hand, as someone that myself has, got, I've been diagnosed as a high functioning autist with significant manic depression. Since I was 13, I've been on antidepressants, and without them, I literally can't function. With them, I run a successful business that turns over quite good money, employs 350 staff. I don't think I'm, like some people that have gone through this, but you never know, right? you just is what it is. So I kind of suspect that it's very much, from the whole pharmaceutical and pharmacology perspective, it's very much hit and miss. They're just guessing. They're trying to fix something they don't understand with something that just may or may not work a lot of the time.
Man, that's probably one of the most profound introductions we've had on this show. I'm so sorry to hear about the tragedy in your family, bro. Look, I can certainly understand the regret that you would have, with the experience you had with your sister. You mentioned that she had a brief encounter with abuse by this old man down the road. Do you believe that was the cause, or do you believe it was something more,
or a catalyst?
Yeah, was that, are we talking straw that broke the camel's back, or are we talking?
Oh, geez. I hope my mother never hears this. When my mother, who had this situation where she locked herself in a bedroom, was supported almost exclusively by my sister. My sister would do all the cooking. She would do all the cleaning. She basically, at 9, 10 years of age, was behaving as though she was the mother of the family while my mother was sick in bed. I think the catalyst that really, sorry about that.
That's all good.
I think the catalyst that really, really knocked my sister about was when she came home after having done all these things to find that my mother was well enough to pack up and disappear, and then didn't talk to her for 2 or 3 years. There was no contact or anything. So I think that was a major, for a child to experience that, I think was pretty intense for her. The situation with the guy, I don't know how far it got. I don't think it went particularly far. And my sister, who was a very, very strong girl, basically turned around to this bloke and told him to, go away. And she promptly came home and the police got involved. And yeah, so, but it certainly didn't help. It didn't help. It didn't help with her view, her nihilistic view of the world and everything else. And I think she definitely battled that. Yeah.
So these events are fairly recent, though, within the last sort of decade.
That my sister took her life. Yeah, probably 6 years, 7 years ago.
Okay, they're fairly recent for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely look, it's not something that, and with respect, honestly, bro, with respect, I've heard a lot of similar stories. This idea of abandonment, hopelessness, insecurity, all of these things. Would you say those were the causal emotions? Like those were the things that she perhaps felt, or because I'm not going to ask what was written in her suicide letter, but was there an anger in her? Was she frustrated, or was it more hopelessness that you saw was the issue? Which I find so bizarre for someone who studied theology and became a youth leader, Yet that is also common, apparently.
It's funny, right? Because the position that she took when she wrote these letters was one very much of wanting to make amends with everyone, right? So it wasn't, there was no malice or hatred in the letters. There was no blame acquisition. I think she had already decided that this is what she was going to do. And so it wasn't, I'm doing this to hurt you or get revenge or anything premeditated, which it can be for a lot of people. A lot of people take their life and it's because they're so grief-stricken. Yeah. Yeah. I think she'd passed that stage of the grief-stricken aspect. I also think that the prolific amount of medications that she was on prohibited her from doing what I think would have been a logical judgment. But she had come to the intellectual conclusion that the purpose of life is pointless. That everything we've learnt about the Creator and everything we've learnt about the existence itself is pointless, and intellectually, absolutely 100% bought into that notion. Her role as a professor at uni, I think, is really indicative of the kind of ethos that they teach at unis. It is now such a spiritually unwell place for people. And you can see it in the management. If you have conversations with people that go to these universities, they believe intellectually that only a fool would believe in God.
Yeah.
The theory of evolution is so completely proven that you'd be an idiot if you thought anything else. But then as a result of that, they adapt this very nihilistic view, which is that everything that exists as an accident. It's all pointless.
Yeah, we definitely agree on that position with regards to a purely naturalistic worldview, a purely, matter and energy, worldview leads you to a purposeless universe. It actually leads you there. I want to ask you a question though. You mentioned you were hard on your sister and you had some regrets about that. What's changed? What do you think, like, since, from that time to now, what's changed in you with respect to perhaps how you see mental illness or how you see a situation like that where someone's hopeless like that? Did anything change or?
So Andrew Tate does this thing. I don't know if you've seen it, right?
No idea who Andrew Tate is.
I don't like Andrew Tate. Just put that out there. But but I've found the whole Andrew Tate thing fascinating, mainly because he's so successfully embraced such a huge number of our youth, right, who are looking for purpose, and he's selling it, right? And that's all he's doing. He's selling it. So he has this view that he's absolutely convinced of, that there's no such thing as depression, and it's all just a mindset. And it speaks to the fact that what he's doing is giving these young boys a sense of hope, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's misguided or not is not the point, but he's selling an idea of strength and hope. But he has this idea on depression and believes that it's there's no such thing. It's just a mental state. And so you choose whether you're depressed or not, And if you are depressed, there's no point in acknowledging that you're depressed. You may as well just acknowledge that you're not. And that way you can convince yourself not to be depressed. Which, I think really speaks volumes to a person that has no appreciation of how debilitating the condition can be.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, in my walk personally, in my experience, because I had this for a long time, I've come to realize that my diet has a huge impact on how depressed I do or don't feel. If I eat anything that's in deep fried oil or any kind of oil product at all, for the next 2 to 3 days, I feel absolutely terrible. If I maintain a healthy diet and avoid that, I feel substantially better. So that's been my personal experience. And whether, my wonderful wife read this book called Little Brain, and it's a
like microbiome.
Yes. Yeah.
Familiar with that.
I think that this depression thing we have in society, which is growing exponentially, is multidimensional in its manifestation and its existence. So I mean to say that I have no doubt that there is a significant spiritual component going on. But I also think there's absolutely toxins and impurities and other things. Vaccines in children. I'm absolutely sure that that causes the Amish, right? It's the only group of people that don't have any autistic children.
My sister was ridiculed by a lot of her friends, even the mother's group friends she was a part of, because she didn't want her kids vaccinated. And it was so interesting to me how successful the marketing campaign was to disenfranchise people with that worldview, with that perspective.
Oh, yeah.
It was unbelievably successful.
And the Amish are they are the control group.
They are the control group. And they also have a very, very low cancer rate, right? So, you take all these things into consideration. You take into consideration the fact that we're injecting our kids with known heavy metals and toxins. We're consuming food that is known to be, seed oil, was initially put in vehicles, right? And then they worked out that if they could reprocess it differently, they could dump it in the food supply. Just one of many foods that I could reel off that I'm absolutely convinced have a significant impact on our mental health.
What about McDonald's chicken nuggets? I had some chicken nuggets. I think it was yesterday. They're absolutely tasty. I'm being serious. I'm being tongue in cheek, but serious at the same time. This food is amazingly tasty. But it's deliberately made that way.
Well,
but
it's engineered.
I know that chicken is probably from the arse and from the bumhole of the chicken. But just give it to me. It's just tasty. And that chicken has probably been put in ammonia, kill all the bugs, what have you. And I don't eat fast food takeaways generally, but the nuggets, they're just there.
And
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Fast food has played a big role, but we don't need to look at fast food. Like, just look at the sugar industry. Like, look what's happened with sugars. you know?
Well, sugars are fantastic. I mean, sugar itself is so highly refined that it cannot be
digested.
No, it cannot be any further refined.
Yeah.
It is as refined, and it's under the Poisons Control Act.
So it's like
it's
a crystalline state. You know.
Well, you see kids that go to a birthday party, and they dose up on these lollies and stuff, and then run around like little psychopaths, and then 2 hours later burn out. I mean, if that's not a form of
something I think is very obvious is that the way that the modern world has treated diet and nutrition has had an adverse effect on the health of people, especially in the West, more so in the West than anywhere, obviously. I mean, we look at things like cancer rates, we look at things like diabetes rates, we look at things like this, and
they're only going one way.
Yeah,
and you would think. I mean, this is the thing. Like, this ties into our discussion on depression. They're only going one way. So at some point, you'd think somebody would go within the industries, within the medical industry, at management or whatever. That's just at a very simple base level. This is really strange. Look at the correlation here. We've got increases in this, increases in that, and maybe we just do a process of deduction like a good doctor. And it doesn't seem to work like that. Then you can only come to one conclusion.
We've got a McDonald's store at the Royal Children's Hospital.
Yeah,
I mean, that just cracks me up, right?
Yeah.
So we're so detached.
Mate,
from...
what's better than Ronald McDonald? Don't hurt the Donald, okay?
But so we're so detached from understanding food as medicine that we see in the primary place where we're supposed to look after kids, we dose them up with sugar and with seed oils and all these processed foods, and we don't understand why they're sick. And for me, this has been a fairly new thing. It's really only been the last sort of 4 or 5 years that I met a guy through the whole COVID shenanigans, and this guy said, everything you think you know about food is a lie, and I'm like,
it's amazing. It's amazing you say that, because for us it was our sort of light bulb moment was 2016, 17, and it sort of started with the progression of things. It was a little bit of Bible, earth, food, and it's sort of the cracks and everything just started cracking apart in lots of different places. And then one of them was basically food. Now, that's not to say that I live my life perfectly, because we're sinful human beings, but we're also weak. So it's like you talked about deep fried. Do you still like the taste of deep fried food?
I haven't had. It's now been 2 years since I've had anything deep fried.
You wean yourself off it, but would you say that the taste is still appealing?
Oh yeah. I mean,
right.
Smoking a joint's good too. Right? There are all sorts of things that are fantastic, that really please the flesh. But they're fundamentally really bad. I mean, the reason these products are so prevalent in our society is because they're good. We like them.
Yeah.
And so for me, since I made these changes with my diet, I'm now what? I'm 47. So I've been on antidepressants since I was 13. For the first time, in all that period over the course of the last 2 years, I've started weaning off them. So I'm having substantially less than I used to. Now, correlation is not causation, blah, blah, blah.
When you say substantially less, in terms of, let's say, you don't tell me the dosage or anything like that, but I just mean, are we talking half, quarter, and 1/8?
Yeah, right now I'm taking about a quarter of what I was.
That's substantial.
David, man, I wish we talked about this prior. You are so different from when we knew each other a few years ago. You are very different, and I can tell you now, I wish we had a different platform to express this, so I could give you a big hug. But honestly, I was trying to figure it out, man. I'm like, what's different about this guy? He's genuinely happier. He's genuinely like, you are very different. I won't go into my opinion too hard, but yeah, there have been several people in my family. I can't believe this didn't click, but yeah, there have been several people in my family who were on antidepressants for a very long time, and coming off them was extremely difficult, like broke up the family to some degree, and there was this period of time where it was very difficult, and then it became a life-changing situation for some of them. So that's, wow. That was a light bulb moment for me, because I was trying to figure out why you're so different.
I've tried. I've tried for years. I've tried for years and years and years, never been able to. So, whether that, I'm assuming. See, here's the interesting thing, because they say it's genetic. So, there's a history of mental illness and depression in my family, right? But then I wonder, well, actually, is there an allergy in my family that is universal? See, the funny thing is, I see these guys come here from China and India, and they're always quite skinny when they come here, right? They are. And after 3 or 4 years, they're looking like the rest of us, right?
Hey, don't say skinny. It triggers me, all right?
Just kidding. But, and you talk to them and you're like, are you, because I've done this just out of curiosity, not sort of trying to pry, but just having it, are you eating more than you used to? No, I'm not. So what is it then? What's changed? It's not the amount of food, it's specifically the things in the food that are causing this issue. So this guy I met during this COVID thing is like, well, weight gain is a sign of inflammation, which is directly connected to the toxins that you're being exposed to. And for me, my experience has been that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, you and Jack should talk, bro. You and Jack. Jack was on the podcast last time.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
2 weeks ago. And he had a boy with cancer. He had something blastoma.
We briefly spoke before, and you were just beforehand about that when the kids are on chemo, they're on chemo to kill the cancers, but they're feeding their children food that helps the cancer grow, which prolongs the chemo treatment. And it just
really
blew our mind.
Really bizarre situation.
Blew my mind. It blew my mind. It's like, and it didn't surprise me that was happening, but it blew my mind that it was happening, because I didn't realize, and I was just like, wow. And then of course you can't really. There's no other way to go other than to go to that assumption and ask that question: is that deliberate? It's like you guys are running a hospital.
Like, he went to the nutritionist, the one who was assigned to his kid, and was basically like here we have. What was it? High fructose, sucrose, potato starch, vegetable oil. He's like, you're feeding this to my kid, and I want to feed him this organic stuff. I think the feeds that he had, the Miracle Feed or whatever it was,
there was some
like,
feed out of the States,
kale, different, green vegetables,
organic and alkaline.
And look, the nutritionist was like, well, that's not our process. We don't do that. It's like, well, mate, I'm the father. I'm going to decide what to do. And look, is this not more healthy? And it was like, it was like you didn't realize. Turns out if you feed a kid unhealthy stuff, they stay unhealthy.
Who would have thought?
But look, I think.
So is that kid getting better?
Yes.
Yeah. He's
miracle child. Yeah.
He's I can't remember Jack's exact words, but and I don't want to misspeak here, but he's one of the only children who was on this specific treatment, taking this particular course of food, to have had this recovery from this disease at that specific time. Not fully recovered yet.
Yeah. So he's still, still some jury score is still 2, which is amazing, right? In terms of the cancer, the degree of cancers in his body. But Sammy is the only neuroblastoma patient who didn't go through certain procedures, like there was some, I don't know exactly what it was, but there were acronyms for different things like BDIs, and I think the big one was the stem cells. He didn't get stem cell treatment, and he's the only one who didn't get those range of treatments and has improved and will do well.
So here's a question. There is a universal web of essentially misinformation and deceit. Yeah, I think. Is it because of Christ that we see these things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise? Is that the spirit of Christ?
Look, I think there was a guy I watched who said it really well. He said, COVID has come about and all of these people who are sensitive to the truth have been pushed away from the left and further to the right. And his opinion was because God represents truth and Christ represents truth, they're secular in nature, but because they have an aversion to deception and lies, they're being pushed towards God and Christ, So in a way, I would say we aren't privy to truth simply because we believe in the Holy Spirit, we believe in the Lord, right? But those who love the truth will come to the conclusion that God is, So that's my opinion with regards to, how truth and deception interact with someone who's not a believer. Even if you are, I think if you are,
maybe some of them will, not all of them.
Yeah,
it's a bit like the Jewish zealots. They believed in Jewish sovereignty and their state and their statehood and truth against the Roman Empire, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But it's like, well, if you live by the sword, you're going to die by it. You live, and so there's you could say these. Let's say call the right conservatives. They have this aversion to injustice and this aversion to evil and control, but then their reaction to it is quite different. Let's say to that of a Christian. It's one to basically take up arms and fight. Now, I'm not talking about self-defense here. I'm talking about actually cutting off heads and storming Parliament or whatever it is. There's a difference.
And we have to be fair. I don't think being a born-again Christian gives you this mantle of, now I understand truth in all things.
No, it definitely doesn't. But it's interesting. I tripped across this article last week of every group in the world, of every political persuasion, of every religion, the one group that was least likely to take the COVID jab, full stop, was Christians.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's interesting, right?
Absolutely.
And to me, that kind of speaks volumes about the awareness of something that might.
I would say Christians and Muslims.
No, it was Christians.
Nah, Christians. We just know what to look for.
Well, I know. Yeah, look, I know a lot.
Look, I think the JWs would have been pretty against the jab too. But to give more credence to what you're saying.
Do they fall into the Christian camp as part of this discussion tonight?
No, I wouldn't say so. But
it was a joke.
But
it was a bit dry.
I think you would lump them in.
I mean,
would you lump Catholics in as well?
So, would I lump them in with?
That was really dry. That one.
Would I lump?
Strike.
Are we still joking here? Or?
I don't know. I think it's striking now. I think we're just trying to start up an argument. No. But look, yeah, you go.
No, I was going to say bring it. So we've gone to, I guess, more of a broad spectrum here. Are we finished this part of the topic, or
no? Let me say one. Let me say just one thing.
One about whether Catholics are Christians, or
no. You go. Sorry.
My sister, one of my sisters who is not particularly fond of Christianity, she was rather frustrated with how many groups she was aligned with that were Christians because she was so anti-jab and because she was so pro self-sustainability. Even to the point where it was very difficult to find a homeschooling option for her kids that wasn't Christian, So not only did she never ended up taking her kids out of school. She never ended up going to a homeschooling situation. Well, look, it's pretty late in the game and I think she's committed. But that said, the sort of testimony to me from her, a very secular person, was that, man, where are all these Christians coming from? We're doing them. So I went to the rallies, I went to the protests, and I can tell you now there was a strong Christian presence there. And I don't know if they're at all of them, but they certainly were there. When I look into people who were looking into the jab, they certainly were from a Christian persuasion, generally. But look, you're right.
To intertwine this back in, like these discussions that we're having about mental illness, mental health, suicide, gut health, and what's causing all these things. And now we're discussing jabs. they're all intertwined.
100%.
They're all intertwined.
Yeah,
and so it's just so we can bring this back together for our listeners. They're all intertwined. I want to take us down a little bit of a different path, if that's all right, just to sort of throw a bit of a spanner in the works. You're talking about, so without taking away from your experience, in my family, it's funny you mentioned, well, it's not funny you mentioned, but you mentioned that in your family, so my papa's brother, he also gassed himself. So I don't know all the story behind that. I just know that was the case. And then in my immediate family, there's, sibling, parent, daughter, suffer, have suffered or still do suffer from these sort of things. And especially one of my family members has been on antipsychotics and antidepressants for a really, really long time, on and off and on and off and on and off. And I want to discuss I guess, the treatments behind it. I mean, we talked about this, maybe it was with Wes. Wes is our new Jamie. He's over in the corner there. Jamie is a reference to Joe Rogan's podcast. He's got Jamie in the corner, but we're not that famous yet.
We're editing all that out. But anyway, yep.
We're not going to edit that out.
Why are you going to edit that out?
I was just joking.
Can you put that up on the screen?
He likes to dox Wes as well,
Oh, what's this with doxing? At this point, you got your phone on the table. I got my phone in here. Like the CIA knows the last little time you went to the toilet. So no more of this doxing rubbish. We're done. Done with that.
Treatments.
Hey, Siri?
Yeah. Hey, sorry. Anyway, at least on Facebook, my last name is, not the name I present in here, whereas you've given your full name. So anyway, what I was going to say is, a couple of weeks ago, at the end of one of our podcasts, I think it was actually it was at the end of our episode 10, and we were talking with Wes, and we got into the issue of treatments for depression. And I brought up, which is something that's very novel, you've mentioned Special K. Now, I don't know firsthand, but I know Special K, people seeing angels and, basically being into completely different realms. And I made the statement that
Well, hang on. Are they in different realms, or are they just tripping?
Don't know. But these are some of the stories that I hear from people who've been on Special K, whether in institutions, whether it's, in the medical, in a medical frame, a hospital, or obviously, outside of that with drug use.
I don't think Special K makes you hallucinate. I think it's purely a tranquilizer.
For horses.
For horses, yeah.
But I understand what you're saying, definitely.
See? That was Siri.
Because you said, "Hey Siri," and she heard it.
She's been recording the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been
you
recording.
are still on it.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that where I'm at in my personal belief, and I'm happy to have them change. Like this is why I love this format of discussions, is that seeing everything that I've seen, again, spiritual oppression, big part to play. Serotonin drops, dopamine levels. There could be, let's say, proclivities because of, because of family history, with the way your body's made, that you're more susceptible to depression due to certain foods and the way they affect you. So, for example, for me, man, I noticed as I got older, then I'm in my 40s, I noticed that alcohol has started to I don't drink a lot of it, but I have done in the past. But I've noticed that, for example, for me, if I was to have even 4 or 5 or 6 beers, which is nothing, let's say in a sitting of 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon, for the next 2 days, my serotonin levels are just wiped out. I'm anxious, and I've noticed that in not my younger years, but in my older years, my serotonin levels have clearly dropped. I'm anxious. I'm feeling really, really down for about 3 days. I go, well, that was a strange difference. It was a strange change. So I'm like, well, that's going to stop. But going to treatments, now that I've seen family members who have been on antidepressants and drugs all their life, and it's destroyed them, one in particular, destroyed them. I don't know what else they could possibly do. And then I start to read up on natural treatments that are completely natural, that are bound in things like, we would call them magic mushrooms, but in this case it's psilocybin. LSD is obviously a manufactured drug. It's superficial. MDMA, and you've heard of ayahuasca and some of these more out there ones, which I'm not condoning, and we're gonna have that discussion another time. But when I start hearing about microdosing of psilocybin and microdosing with LSD and on these minuscule amounts, see, when we talk about antidepressants, so we say, great, they have served a purpose, which you mentioned. They've served a purpose for a specific time, and they helped. They're not long term. I would say, okay, fair dinkum, no worries. But then I think to myself, but these things aren't natural, and they are destructive. They are completely destructive long term. And I'm saying, well, here's an alternative. Here's an alternative that God made. Now, the only issue that some people would say is, yeah, but pharmakeia, these have been used traditionally for shamanistic practices to invite spirits to be into the dark realm. I say, yeah, but there's lots of things that we use that have been misused by God. I mean, sex is misused by human beings. There's lots of things that we misuse that God has given, that God has made, that we use for evil practices.
Alcohol.
Alcohol. So what I'm suggesting is yes, there is a subset. I mean, especially in Hollywood, Silicon Valley, where they're what I would say they're misusing these things. I would say they're misusing them. We talked about really briefly about accessing spiritual realms to access information, that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about moments in time where I don't know if we can actually know whether a depression is gut related, whether it's spiritual oppression, whether it's just serotonin levels have dropped or dopamine, whatever it is, because of our own issues with our body that are not necessarily gut related. I don't know if we can know, but if we're going to pick some form of medicinal, let's say, ally, why are we picking these ones? Why are we picking antidepressants that are made by pharmaceutical industry that we clearly don't trust? We know that they have long-term damage, and yet for these subjects here, which some of which are natural, they have been demonized, and you could say cast a black net over because of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the roaring 60s, and everyone was having sex and just being high, loosening the sky with diamonds, all this kind of stuff, and we're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I can't speak from a place of like my cousins. I mentioned to you that two of my cousins on the Aussie side had taken their own life, and both of them I didn't really know that well. One I met, the other one I didn't. But it's close enough to home. But I don't suffer with depression myself. I've had moments in a life. I've only had one moment in a life, where very low moment 12 years ago, which I won't discuss tonight. But I can't say it's been to the same length that, say, it has for you or for my family members. But I wanted to discuss that maybe briefly and see where you guys are at, because I sort of see, no offense, I see a bit of hypocrisy in some ways, where it's like, okay, this is okay, but hey, look, we're going to throw this one out because maybe if you take too much of it, you can access spiritual realms. It's like, well, but God made this. God didn't make this. I want to see what you guys think about that perspective.
Do you want to go first?
No, I'm keen to hear all you.
So, first things first, right? I believe that mental illness does have a root cause in your relationship with God. I believe that physical aspects of mental illness come secondary to the spiritual aspect. So to put that clearly, there is a majority issue spiritually, and then or you might say spiritually and emotionally, and then there is a small factor which plays a part, which is the physical, right? And that's my opinion. It's probably, like, people might argue, oh, well, emotional becomes physical because of the hormones and chemicals in our brains. And I think, look, I still think the science is very unclear on that stuff. I still think that there's a lot of unknowns. But I do concede that there are absolutely effects that certain compounds have on our brains, but those aren't the root causes. And when we start talking about how we're going to treat a spiritual illness, an emotional illness with a physical drug, we're putting the cart before the horse. Does it play a part? In my opinion, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, my opinion from understanding the scriptures, it comes secondary. I mean, what I mean by that is...
How does that mesh, though, with our discussions earlier that the gut health and basically a messed up microbiome is playing on the mind and on the brain and on our moods?
Yeah, but what's causing...
That is biological.
Okay, so let's put this into a real world perspective, okay? So someone has bad gut health, right? in this society, which I struggle with 100%, it is generally a what's the best word? An irresponsible approach to nutrition. So whether that's just eating fast food, or whether that's just eating unhealthy foods in particular, and not getting any exercise or something, something like that, that in and of itself is a spiritual problem. So the root cause, yes, the gut health is causing an issue and compounding the problem, but the root cause is a spiritual issue. Perhaps it's discipline. In my case, it's certainly discipline. Perhaps it's gluttony. In my case, it's certainly gluttony. Those are spiritual issues, So someone might, I saw a doctor. Yeah. I saw a doctor recently. It was so beautiful, He hadn't seen me since before COVID. I had conjunctivitis, and this was months ago actually. And I sat down with him, and he looked at me and he goes, "I walked." Sorry. All good. I walked into the doctor's office, and he looked at me. He moved his glasses. He looked at me, and he sat down, and he goes, "Cody, do we need to talk?" I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" He goes, "You've put on a lot of weight." I was so moved.
He's getting away with doing that impression because you're brown. But if you're and I doing that tonight, this whole thing's gonna be cancelled.
I don't see him as brown.
No, I'm mocha, bro.
I reckon you're totally bordering on pure racism there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Can you do an Asian one?
No,
oh, okay.
Not as good as someone I know who I won't name, but honestly,
and it's not me, by the way.
No, it's not. The compassion he required and the honesty he required to say that to me.
Or maybe he's just a prick.
Nah, he was cool, man. He was really cool. So I said to him, "Oh, look, it's all good. I'm just struggling with discipline, struggling with this." And he looked at me and he was like, "Are you sure?" As if to question, "Cody, what's going on with you?" So even his perspective, just a GP who I know and love, he's awesome. He indicated that Cody, there's something wrong with you emotionally, and I would say that's pretty true,
So without being a nuisance, my question wasn't whether or not it was a spiritual issue or not, because I would concede that potentially is. It was actually whether we should use these drugs or these ones.
Well, no, because I see what he's going. He's saying that if it's a spiritual issue, then it can't be addressed with a real world physical.
It can't be fixed. Agreed. I agree with that. It can't be fixed. But we're talking about alleviation here.
There's a purpose to my story.
Yeah, sure.
If I'd have gone in there and he pointed this out, because immediately he tried to talk about how I was in my well-being. He tried to understand how I was spiritually, right? Which I thought was amazing, because there have been doctors that have tried to address this idea that, all right, Cody, we need to change your diet. Straight away, just we need to change your diet. And I appreciate that as well. But my point of pointing this out is that if I'd have walked into a doctor's office and someone said, well, maybe you need to start writing a journal, about what you could start doing to start helping your motivation and your desire and your willpower to actually overcome these issues you're having with food, I would say, yeah, that might help, but it would be so ineffectual ultimately that I don't think any doctor would try to give a really side sort of answer. But our doctors, in my opinion, are so heavily pushed and biased towards medication that they don't see it that way,
Agreed.
So
agreed.
My response to you would be that, solving the core issue is more important. And is it better to use natural drugs? Is it better to use synthetic drugs? What that for me, it's such a non-issue.
But that actually was. Sorry, seeing as this is a lovely organic podcast, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah,
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just solely asking one question: if we are going to, for the purposes of, if we had to, right, alleviate the symptoms while someone's struggling with this and working this out, whether or not they are this or this. That was my question.
Yeah. So my response to that is, bro, this is not.
We can't go back. I get the other issue because I agree with you.
Yeah. So all my response is highlighting is that it's really irrelevant, Jason. It's irrelevant. Like what you're talking about.
But you mentioned earlier, no, but it's not irrelevant because earlier in the piece you mentioned that obviously for your own family member you saw.
Let me be clearer.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me be clearer. Okay. I don't care whether it's synthetic or organic or natural.
Mm.
You know, these things are not going to be the primary cause of overcoming mental illness.
No, they're not.
You know, and so when it comes to
so your basis of mental illness is that it is exclusively a spiritual issue.
No, not at all.
But if it's not exclusively a spiritual issue, if that's not the founding or the foundation of it, if it is in fact a physical chemical imbalance, and these pharmaceuticals fix it, where is the problem?
So, sorry, ask that again. Sorry.
All right. So if you concede that mental illness, as in depression or let's say anxiety, or
has a physical element.
Has a organic component.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
As opposed to spiritual.
Yep.
So, like for example, let's say you have diabetes. Yeah. Diabetes can be treated with medications. You know, glucose. But how you got there is another point. But you have it, you treat it. What is the fundamental difference between treating someone that has diabetes with medication versus treating someone that has depression with medication?
Well, type 1 diabetes is you're born with that. Type 2 is completely curable.
Okay, well, type 1.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
type 1, yeah. But it's a good point because that's what I'm saying. We're kind of, it's kind of self-refuting.
So let me answer your question, bro. Because I just thought it was important to point that out first. You know, from my perspective, I would say that the natural is always going to be better. So whether it's a refined natural compound or not, you know, I think about how we often abuse God's creation and we often turn it to wickedness. And I think there's such a risk. I mean, look at what opium did to our society. Look at what opium did to the human race. You know, like there's such a risk involved with that.
But people are already. But this is the thing. Like people are already abusing. Christians are already abusing antidepressants.
So what I'm saying is that if I have to choose between synthetic and natural, I'm going to choose natural. You know,
but this is my question.
But the connotation to what you're pointing out is that we should look into this.
Correct, because correct is that is my connotation. I'm not refuting the spiritual element, but here's the thing: we talked about this beforehand as well. So, so the Prince of Preachers, Charles Spurgeon.
Yeah,
did he have a spiritual issue?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
What do you mean?
Well,
be more specific.
He had dark depression.
Yeah,
his whole life.
Absolutely.
So did he have a spiritual issue?
Yeah. Have you read Grace Abounding?
Yes.
Yeah. So from my understanding of what overcame his spiritual issue was a deeper understanding of God and a greater relationship with him. You know, now, does that mean that food didn't play a part, that tobacco smoking didn't play a part, that
tobacco smoking did not play a part?
Well, no,
there's nothing.
He was a prolific pipe smoker, you know. But what I'm saying is that
J.R. Tolkien.
You know, yeah, I agree, bro. You know, there's definitely aspects of this that are open to interpretation, that are grey, so to speak. You know, even Paul says, you know, have a little wine for thy stomach's sake. You know, so. What I find in Scripture, which is what I rely on to understand the nature of mental illness and to understand what treats it, you know, I find that it literally plays no part. So Paul.
But what does the Scripture say about diabetes?
So this is the thing. I wouldn't call diabetes a mental health issue. You know, I wouldn't think that that's a spiritual issue. Like cancer, I don't think cancer is a spiritual issue.
I know what you're saying, and I know what you're saying, and I'm going to try to bridge the gap here. So what we're getting at here is we're saying the fundamental things in our life which could potentially cause mental illness. So let's say in the case of the foods that we're eating. We're not looking after ourselves. It could be through gluttony. It could be through, but those things are so nuanced as well. It's like the foods now are just designed to be so. So we talked about food and eating before, nuggets. So the foods are designed to be so tasty now. It's almost impossible sometimes to basically revert to a place where we go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go organic, because obviously you're eating different now too. So therein lies a bit of a spiritual battle. It's like you know something's not good for you. It could be copious amounts of alcohol during COVID. I mean, there's one thing about Ricky Gervais that I quite love, and not that he's an atheist, but he says, you know what, there's no sequel, we die tomorrow. There's no sequel. So sometimes when I talk about things and people say, that's too personal, it's like, you know what, I could drop dead tomorrow, it doesn't matter anyway. During COVID, red wine was a good friend. It was so bored. It was so boring. You know, there was lots of work happening like that. And I knew that it was wrong. You know, I'm a very high functioning individual, so it didn't bother me. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. But the health effects were huge. So I knew in that moment, I knew that this wasn't good for me. You shouldn't be working really, really hard and consuming lots of red wine at the same time. Now that's a spiritual issue, okay? But that's a spiritual issue definitely, because that's like I'm going against what I should be doing. But if we're talking about in a general sense here with the gut, and you've got a whole lot of individuals, Christians, whoever, all right, and they're just consuming the food that's in their environment, and their gut is affected by that, which in turn is affecting their mood, their biology, and everything else, and they're unaware of it. How is that a spiritual issue?
So
did I go on the right thread here?
No.
So I think what you're saying is
No. I think where we're at an impasse is the understanding of what mental illness is.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the mistake a lot of Christians tend to make is that mental illness is the way a person's thinking. Right.
Yep.
And this is affecting their outlook in life.
Mm-mm.
It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, that can certainly be part of it, but what it actually is no different. Your brain, which is an incredibly complex organ, right, is not working the way it should be. Just like hypothetically speaking, you have a heart condition where your heart murmurs, irregularly, and you have to take some form of medication to try and contain or control it. Or just the same as you have a growth that appears on your foot, which means that you're limping, right? So what Christians do, a lot of Christians seem to do is they actually downplay the significance of what it is. And if I can try and relate to you a visual of what it's like to be in a state of depression, imagine being out in the water on some rocks, naked, pelted by the rain and hail. That's what it's like. And it doesn't matter what you think, whether you have a close relationship with God, whether you, concentrate and focus on doing positive things. This sense of absolute fear and dread and anxiety, right, is something that is so pervasive and something that is so significant that I refuse to accept that it's simply a connection with God. It can and is, for a lot of people, a physical ailment. And the point I'm trying to make is that just like, for example, if you had a physical condition with diabetes type A, right, you would seek to treat it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't dismiss it. Well, the reason you've got diabetes type A is because you're having a spiritual problem.
Yeah. So you just mentioned something really interesting, bro, and I want to stress this. I guess I've had my brushes with depression, I haven't had the experience my mother has had, and I haven't had the experience my brother has had, which has been crippling, Pastor Eddie has had crippling depression, and he had it for a long time. I haven't had the experience, and so I want to make that clear. My opinion is that in Romans it says, be renewed by the transforming of your mind. And you mentioned the brain, this complex organ that we have, which in my opinion, we scarcely understand. We scarcely understand the brain. Cause and effect in the chemicals in our brain, I think, is less understood than we're being led to believe, So my answer, which comes from a place that is not experienced with depression, obviously to the extent of yourself, is that there is no quick fix, You know, it's not like you can have a prayer and you can have a time of fellowship with the brethren, or a sit down and a reading of the scriptures to solve a very deeply ingrained and developed issue. You know, especially with, for example, sin. There's sin in my life that I've struggled with even since 4 years ago when I was born again. I still struggle with these sins, you know. So is this, my relationship with God is lacking, you know? And I would say no, there's always going to be sin in my life. Just like there's always going to be perhaps the threat of falling into depression, the threat of becoming anxious. And the Bible makes this clear. Paul makes it clear that these things come about. The solutions he provides are always relating to your perspective on your relationship with God. So, you know, I don't want to come across as this Christian who says, well, God will solve that for you. You know, I don't believe that that we can ever be fully rid of these ailments that we have, you know.
Because we're in a fall, and this is the thing, we can't get rid of these issues because we're in a fallen world.
Yeah,
because we're in a fallen world, it's completely messed up, not the way it's supposed to be.
And I have to concede, you know, when I come across people with Down syndrome or autism, you know, I don't, you know, how would we treat these issues, you know? Am I looking at them incorrectly? You know, should depression and anxiety be treated as a physical issue? You know, I don't know. But what I do know is that when it comes to the description that I find in the scriptures about anxiousness, about doubt, about fear, you know, the answer is always to draw nearer to God. That's the answer that the scriptures give us. It doesn't give us an indication that there is it says bodily exercise profiteth little, you know, but spiritual exercise.
So can you draw nearer to God and still suffer with depression?
Oh, absolutely. I believe. So to be clear, you know, we will reach perfection in heaven. We will reach an incorruptible body that does not suffer sin, that does not suffer pain, that does not suffer tears in heaven. But here we find the New Testament is so adamant. Paul specifically wrote 13 books of the New Testament. So specifically is encouraging us not to be afraid, not to be anxious, not to be sinful, because he knows, as does God, we're going to struggle with it all the days of our life, you know?
Yeah. So I've got a bobcat. And
what, the illegal animal?
No.
Okay.
No. The you know, the skid steer thing.
Yeah.
You enjoy riding that thing, don't you?
I love it. Yeah, I do. I actually use it today.
Toy.
Anyway, so I bought the bobcat about 8 or 9 years ago for a steal. It was like 11 grand.
Yeah, that is a steal.
And from this guy who his name was Slav, and I said to Slav, is this a good bike? I promise you'll love this machine. Yeah. And the very second I got it home, I lifted the lid on this bobcat and the hose blew. Actually, Mary was standing next to me at the time, and this red hydro fluid covered her. Oh. That was the first foray. That machine was the single greatest waste of money I've ever bought, ever. I have had to replace everything from the pumps to... Anyway... Met a guy, his name's Joe. Joe came over. I left a message on Joe's phone, which must have been apparently, he says it was about 20 minutes, basically explaining all the problems with this machine and the fact that I had no idea what it was doing. I desperately needed his help.
That sounds like my the voice text messages I leave with this guy that he loves every time. Man, stop sending me anyway, sorry.
So Joe comes over and the conversation of his father comes up. And I said to him, you know, how's your dad now? And he said, oh, he's dead. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened to him? He said, he killed himself. And I said, oh, you know, I don't want to pry, but what were the circumstances? So Joe was 16, came home, and his father hung himself in the lounge room. And so Joe was the very first person to walk in and see his father. Joe is just on 60. And the implications, the scar of this experience on him. So, and we've developed this, I think in part because of this, but you know, many other things, we've developed quite a good friendship. The implications on him of having had this experience has been so destructive on him that I can't even begin to tell you the grief that I still see in him, 40 years later. Now, my question is, for a person to know that this is the sort of damage you're going to cause, this is the sort of harm you're going to cause, how could anyone operating in a rational position at all do that? Right? The assumption is, well, obviously this is a spiritual issue. They don't have a good relationship with God, which was precisely and exactly the same thing that family members of mine said about my sister. But I absolutely can unequivocally tell you without any doubt that I think in so much as she was concerned, it was a combination of both the spiritual thing and the physical thing.
Yeah, which I concede 100%. Yeah.
In relation to microdosing and stuff, one of the fascinating things is that with my sister, after she initially tried to take her own life, I did some reading and I tripped across this tribe in Africa or somewhere, I can't remember. And they do this thing where they bring you over. And
Was it a pun? You tripped across the tribe?
No, it wasn't. But I can see how you...
I thought that too, yeah.
That's so cool that you did it undeliberately.
You think there's this tribe in Africa. They do this spiritual awakening thing, right? And it's very good for people that have drug addictions, and it's very good for people that are suffering from depression. Apparently, they do this thing. They take these psychedelics for about a week, and they come out of it apparently completely cured. So I offered to pay for my sister to do this. So this should indicate my position. Her husband didn't want her to. But she was, where she was at spiritually, I think she would have done anything basically. But the research from that treatment is actually really, really good. It's really beneficial. But my personal experience has been that it's a combination of several things. I think the other thing is, you live in this world. I mean, I look at kids that we send them into this education system that essentially makes them feel bad about who they are, teaches them there's no God, teaches them that life is pointless, teaches them that they should feel shame because they're living on land that's been stolen from people they never knew. This constant sense of self-hate is really promoted to our kids, and then we feed them a diet of just rubbish, and then we feed them intellectually all these television shows that are nihilistic, narcissistic, and toxic. Sexual ideologies
which is a spiritual component.
That absolutely, that's how I see it too.
Did we touch on social media yet? The absolute.
Do we have to go there? It's like the most obvious one. Yeah.
It doesn't surprise. I mean, they said during the lockdown things, mental illnesses skyrocketed.
Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up as well.
Was that a spiritual thing, or was that a organic environmental response? Right.
Yeah. So I do believe it was a spiritual thing. Like when we're removed from the liberties that we should have, it definitely is a spiritual. Like so for instance, you look at the Jews in the Holocaust, right? So you look at the ones specifically. I don't know if it was Dachau or if it was Auschwitz. There's these journals that were written with regards to the Jewish people that died and the Jewish people that survived under the same circumstances with regards to being fed and being healthy, right? The defining factor was their spirit, so as soon as they gave up hope, they died a couple of days later.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've heard that mouse experiment, right? Where they get two sets of mice and they put them in water. They put the mice in the water for, I think, 30 seconds or something, and then pull out one group and then put them both back in again. So the first group doesn't get put in, the second group gets put in once, they're left in for 30 seconds, and then they're pulled out. Then they put both the groups back in, and the group that was pulled out initially after the 30 seconds survives and keeps swimming for substantially longer than the first group because of the hope the belief that they're going to get pulled out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I think hope has a huge impact on the spirit, on the soul of
But I will not say that it wasn't an environmental cause as well. Again, the reason I'm focusing on the spiritual in regards to the aspect of, say, the COVID lockdowns is because Paul gives us this impression that no matter where we are, no matter what situation we're in, we should be content, with food and raiment, So he was in prison when he wrote that, So the idea that his environment was going to determine for him that he was going to be depressed was definitely a thought, because he had to write that, no, I can be content here, And that was the example he gave to the church in, I believe it was Philippi. I'm not sure which epistle it was in.
Well, Paul's a better man than me.
Look,
I'd say that.
without going down too much of a deep rabbit hole with this one, but during COVID as well, there's also, so there's a snapshot of the population. There's also personality makeup. The ones that I see who survive better, I'm not mad, or those that had that kind of rebellious streak. How do I say a rebellious streak, or a I see what you're doing, I reject it streak. Didn't go along, didn't say yes, said no. Yes, they might have had their moments during those 2 years where they were down, they were feeling a little bit down about it, but they were in it for the long haul. They were like, we're going to resist this. We're going to sit this out. And so there's almost like it's, then it becomes almost like an experiment. Let's see who the subset group is, and let's see who kind of folds.
I kind of think, for me personally, I genuinely think that I came out of that with a form of PTSD.
Yeah. COVID.
Yeah.
So, sorry to cut you off. A very close friend of mine confided something in me which blew me away. I nearly fell off my chair. He has literally never talked to me about any kind of emotional or spiritual issue in any way. And this was the first time it happened. Since then, it's happened a lot. And he said, I was driving to work the other day, and I couldn't see any cars on the street, and I couldn't see anyone on the footpaths, and I couldn't see anyone playing in parks. And I pulled over and I couldn't breathe. And I said, what happened? He goes, it reminded me of lockdown. And I seriously nearly fell out of the chair, It affected him so deeply. And this is a guy you wouldn't think this, right? It affected him so deeply, he actually felt he had to share that with me,
Yeah.
And so I believe many people have been affected, man. Many,
Yeah.
In different ways.
Yeah. So the whole thing was run exactly the way you'd expect
an operation.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a military operation funded by, run and controlled by the military.
A PSYOP.
It was a PSYOP.
Yeah.
But it was a military program. And so taking that fourth generation warfare aspect into it, right? If you have a look at the soldiers that are returning from being in a war, and then the prevalence of PTSD, it's actually quite high. And I'm not suggesting that, I've got this crippling PTSD, but I definitely, the anxiety of that whole experience that kicked in afterwards, after it was all over, right? So it's like, fighting the whole time. And then when it came to an end, right, it was like, it's coming back. They're going to do this again. What are they doing next? Right. And I know a lot of people that have really suffered like that,
My answer to that, at least to my friend who shared that with me, was that, we won't have a political answer to this, and we won't have an answer to this that prevents this from happening again. So you'll need to find another hope. You'll need to find something else.
That is the deep hard truth. It's we're at a point, and I think this.
And he wasn't a believer, so I was trying to bring it into a gospel message, But I can honestly say, that's the advice I would have for anyone. Like this is not something we can control. And so the only way we can deal with it, at least, because it affected me too. And the way that I try to deal with it was to say, well, I know my God's in control. And I know that there is a. People say that wonderful story. The world's not falling apart; it's all falling into place. And that's something.
No,
that
it's
gives me
working.
comfort.
It's working exactly as it was designed.
But honestly, it's this human experience that I've had has shown that Yes, both are at play. There are environmental factors, there are environmental aspects, but the answer that has worked the most consistently for me has been to take it to the cross and has been to ask God for help. I can admit that a lot of my consciousness was changed from drug use, and not all of it. The majority was, but not all of it was bad. There were some positive things, but I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze in regards to experimenting with hallucinogenics with an African tribe. Say, my mum was I think she tried hypnotism. I can't remember if she did, to quit smoking. And that was a big fad. That everyone was getting hypnotized.
Did it work?
I can't remember. No, it didn't.
Right.
but I remember hearing the stats were amazing on it. And
well, yeah, they are.
Yeah,
they are. They actually are.
The hope I would have is that, and I know this sounds harsh, right? But the hope I would have is that people would have the gospel. There's a verse I think of, what profiteth man to have the whole world and lose his own soul, and I think of that because,
I think of the song "My Kingdom for a Horse," but
what's that song?
What is that song? Can you? Hey,
is that Slim
I think
Dusty
it's
or
Collective Soul? I think.
Can you sing it for us?
No, I can't.
I'll play the guitar. No, and
I only know that song.
I know it. Yeah, I know it.
Whoa. Heaven, let your light shine.
Yeah.
That's the only one I remember.
Is that live? Or is that live?
And that's the one-handed drummer.
Is that Collective Soul?
Yes, it is Collective Soul. The one-handed drummer.
Yeah.
Is this a Christian band? Is this a
no?
Okay.
I think there was that was Creed.
No, Creed. Yeah, I know the Creed songs. Yeah.
Did you ever go to Black Stump? Either of you ever go to Black Stump?
No, what's
it was
is that like Rainbow?
Pub called Black Stump.
No. I'm sure. No, it was a Christian rock camp up in Queensland.
No.
Yeah,
I never went interstate for Christian camps.
It was very unchristian. Actually, it was terrible. I think my parents
were there lots of psychedelics there.
No, there was just some very, very, I think, inappropriate, unvetted bands.
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
So when we all got back, the kids, the elders in the church were particularly unhappy. I still remember like yesterday. What about Shiloh Ranch?
I've been to Shiloh Ranch. Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah.
That's right.
I got no idea who these bands are.
No, they're not a band. They're not a band.
No, it's a campsite.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. Shiloh Ranch was cool.
It was fantastic. Yeah. They're not there anymore.
No, they're not. And a lot of them are gone. So Forest Edge was the main one that I went to. CYC's taken them all. So
and what shut them down or?
No, I think they just people sold the land. People just because even Adenac or even cows, even the CYC cows wasn't theirs from the start. It was originally a church's. So usually CYC comes in and buys it from a church or a family that was known to the church or something. I know of 4 locations that were.
And then what? They just subsidized.
So now they're like adventure camps. Like they just have schools and they have different other groups. That run it, but CYC basically gets the first dibs on dates and stuff like that, and it's different to certain locations. But I understood most of them to be exclusively for certain churches. Specifically, Forest Edge was owned by a church family. Even Crystal Creek was owned by a group of Baptist churches in Alexandra Adventure Park. But yeah, they get sold, and then different corporate entities take over, which I think is a shame.
Yeah, that's an absolute shame. You would think if that was your legacy, right, you'd want to make sure that it would continue, right?
Log cabin camp.
Are we talking about camps now?
No,
we changed the subject now.
Sorry, you're right. Actually, we are pushing it for time.
We get out of time.
I will say this. No, I've completely forgotten my train of thought before Wes came to the camera. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, you were talking about, I think, Paul. But no, that was earlier.
And you said that Paul was definitely a better person than yourself. And
That was ages ago.
Yeah, that was,
Oh, was
that's
bro,
going back a bit.
oh, was that
but-
okay?
So
Yeah.
so then I'll,
Well,
that's right. No, I got it.
I think it would be rather challenging to be in a dungy prison cell, right, and still maintain a positive outlook. I think that would require an element of intellectual control, which is like pretty impressive.
Look, there's no doubt that this guy was powerful in the Holy Spirit. There's no doubt, right? And absolutely. I mean, the guy walked with Jesus for 3 years. Paul was trained by Jesus for 3 years, you know. We're also talking about an individual who was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. You know, this guy was not to be trifled with. You know, his willpower was quite strong. My point was that if I could choose between someone quitting smoking and knowing the gospel, I would choose the gospel every time. You know, what profit of man to have the whole world and lose his own soul? The purpose of quoting
That's right. That's
Yeah.
what. And then we went to the
the horse, kingdom
Yeah.
horse or whatever it was.
Sorry about that.
So to go.
Hey man,
Yeah.
why are you interrupting me? I just got to where I was at. So I would choose.
Hurry up.
I would say to someone. I would say to someone, look.
He loves the hand coming out. It's just like this. I'm talking now.
Calm down. I got this. I got this.
yeah.
It's
He
all
loves that
extra.
hand. He always comes reaching across here. It's like,
Well,
shut up.
We tried it. We tried
Shut
it
up.
under the table, but it just started looking real weird. You know when I was
It's
going.
not gonna look good either.
But look, it's with mum
The
in
submissive
particular.
wife thing. Yeah.
And that's it. And then the knee squeeze. You know,
Yeah.
just yeah.
Submissive wife.
Get out of it, man.
Yeah.
Oh, you should definitely cut that out.
Mum trying to quit smoking and using
Champax?
no not hypnosis.
Yeah.
You know, if I could go back and talk to mum before that, I would say, Mum, find Christ first. Believe the gospel first, you know, and see if that can have a wonderful change in you and see if that can empower you to quit smoking. Bro, I never thought I would quit smoking. And I went on my hands and knees before God and said to him, I know I can't do this. I know only you can do this. And if you help me, I promise I'll try and stay faithful. And something wonderful happened that, you know, other people struggle with and don't have a similar experience, where he made it quite easy for me to quit, as if to mock me. You know, not to mock me, but as if to say, this is how easy I can make something. You know, my wife had a similar experience, you know, with some of the things that she had issues with, you know, and it's actually quite astonishing how successful the rates of so we grew up in AA. My dad was an alcoholic. We grew up in AA, right? We started in Alateen, you know, Al-Anon, and moved to go to AA meetings with Dad, something that shocked me was the statistics on how many people quit drinking after one visit to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's in the 0.01 percentile. So they go to AA and they have a pretty much zero chance of quitting alcohol if they don't go back, you know. And that to me is shocking when you consider people who believe the gospel and people who seek after God. And I don't have the stats on it because they don't exist, but something tells me that people who develop a relationship with God have a higher success rate of quitting alcohol than AA does, you know.
Quit being alcoholics.
Yeah, and AA was based on a biblical worldview. It was based on the scriptures, you know, and they've actually taken a lot of it out. But
Yeah, they have.
yeah,
But what you're really saying, if I can just summarize your position,
please.
AA should start using hypnosis to get people to stop drinking.
No. What I'm saying is that they should start using the gospel to get people to quit drinking. That comes first.
Yeah.
You know, which brings me to a question. You know, and I'm so sorry. Have you heard our podcast before? Have you listened to much of it? There's a question I always ask, and it's a very important question.
Are we at the end already?
We're very close to it. Yeah.
Oh, really? I hadn't finished yet.
Well,
I got a bit left in the tank yet.
something-
You kept talking.
something
I've been sitting here nice and solemn, waiting for a chance to get
indicative of the Christian is sacrificing what you want for the greater good.
in. Oh, I've been sacrificing this whole last hour and a half.
Go on, bro. Go on.
I just don't think we've come to a consensus yet.
On what?
Well, that's what I mean. Like we haven't even come to a conclusion, and we're getting to the end already.
On what mental health is?
Well, no, not even that. Just like because mine's a bit of a hybrid position. We haven't even come to the consensus, and I think the listeners will go, "Hey guys, you didn't get to an end yet," and so we're kind of ending it prematurely.
What do you think the end is?
What is the end?
Like, because I don't think we're going to come
This
to
is
a...
the end. Oh, that's the song. No. What I mean is that like we've got get right into there. We've got sort of a hybrid position here where I'm yes, it's spiritual, it's physical. physical and it's spiritual, and obviously you're in that position there, and you're more towards it's mostly a spiritual thing. But my simple question was, when we talked about right at the beginning about the pharmaceutical industry and obviously what they've sort of peddled to pretty much just cure it, right? There's been no spiritual element whatsoever, and it hasn't worked. My simple question was, and I just wanted to sort of come to that consensus amongst us, is that until the time in which someone is able to potentially cure it spiritually, if it's a spiritual issue, which we don't always know, we don't know if and if it's not a spiritual issue and it is a physical ailment, and it is a physical ailment, a physical issue, are natural substances that we would commonly call hallucinogenic drugs, obviously, that were misused. Are they better, and will they have, obviously, for a small period of time, are they a better alternative, right? If it's not a spiritual issue, than these drugs here. That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to get your unequivocal position. Not that going back to the spiritual things, I get that. I'm saying as an alternative, as a limited time, or very, like you said, you've gone from a position of using this much with antidepressants to now bringing it down to a quarter. So there's obviously a progression here. So all I'm asking here is unequivocally, this, get rid of it, and this, hey, look, more studies. So psilocybin studies, other studies.
Well, isn't there like, if you're going to take this from a religious perspective, the Bible says very clear. I know this because I know guys that are prolific pot smokers that say this constantly. That every herb and plant is there for you to consume, right? And then for every ailment, there is a plant that God has made available. I can't remember the text. I can look them up. But the Bible's quite clear about that. So if it's a matter of moral ethics in relation to, well, does this go against, just because Big Pharma says that something is bad, right? Magic mushies or,
THC.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, consuming THC, I can see that being okay. Intentionally smoking it, right? Not that I'm advocating for that in any respect at all. I think for me personally, that scene is quite dangerous. Because of the issues I have with depression, something like that just knocks me around in a big way. But for some people, it's it's certainly, I don't see an issue, and the Bible doesn't say don't eat magic mushrooms, right? It's terrible.
Well, it's not specific about it. It says renew your mind. It also says be of a sober mind, and then obviously we've got Genesis, which is like all seed, herbs, all these things I give to you, and reign to have dominion over. So to get to the conclusion on this, I agree with you. Spiritual issue.
Yeah. Let me say.
Clarify,
so if you're saying, okay, we've identified this is not a spiritual issue, this is a physical issue, and we have a choice between choosing a synthetic drug or a natural drug to medicate,
of whatever description.
Definitely the natural, bro. 100%. Look at Sammy. Look at Sammy and the synthetic foods they've fed him as opposed to the organic foods.
So how, as Christians then, how do we differentiate between, right, what God has made and what God has deemed for good and the other uses which we see in the world? Because within
what do you mean, bro? We know that. Everyone knows that.
I know, but the stigma behind it.
What stigma?
Huh?
What do you mean stigma?
Man, there's a huge stigma behind, let's say, some of these hallucinogenic substances that are consumed in high doses, but obviously at very minuscule doses, as we said, can be quite helpful.
For what?
For what? For obviously the serotonin levels for the brain.
Yeah. So in the situation,
what do you mean for what? You know the answer to that question.
So in the situation, no. So you presented me with a situation where we know a certain ailment is physical.
Yes.
Right. And I'm supposing, and I'm saying
that it has to be fixed.
Yeah, I'm saying that in every spiritual issue that you have, right, there is going to be a physical element that will address it. Whether it be gluttony, whether it be lameness, whether it be depression, there is going to be a physical element that will aid you in some way. but we can't put the cart before the horse.
No,
My
no,
opinion
no
is that
one's
the
dis-
spiritual
yeah.
element is far more important.
No one's disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
Again, we're going back in circles. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
So and I'm not talking about long-term use here. I'm talking about alleviation. So otherwise we just go full spiritual. We get rid of alleviation completely. And again, it goes back to another point I made earlier, which is if we've got such a crappy food industry, we're just consuming food that's just so toxic. There's literally people out there who are having these issues with depression because of gut issues. How it's not a spiritual issue from their point of view because they're not the ones perpetuating it.
But it is a spiritual issue.
It kind of is in part a spiritual issue,
But they're not aware of it.
Well, no, they're victims of a spiritual war.
Yes,
Right.
correct.
Is how I see it. Right. So, same thing with, for example, all those kids who are permanently harmed. Right. And I saw that at Royal Children's Hospital. It broke my heart walking through there, seeing all these children that are permanently harmed from. I know exactly what it's from. I know exactly where it came from. I know exactly how it was done. And you just see these victims that did what they thought was best. Right. I honestly see them as victims of a spiritual war. So they're totally they're two different scenarios, right? Trying to medicate someone who is a victim of a spiritual war, then it would make more sense to me to actually make them aware of what the war is, and then they're empowered to do something about it. But if we assume that this is, what a person is enduring is a physical ailment, and how you confirm that, I don't know. Right.
Which is the issue. Which is why I want to dig deeper into this.
Yeah.
I know we don't have tons of time tonight.
But I know what you're saying, Jase, and I get it. But it's a very nuanced situation.
Correct.
I think it's so specific. It would have to be very, very like a case by case thing. So for instance, if I would administer THC oil or cannabis oil to someone for some kind of pain relief or something like that, is obviously going to be very different to if I want to induce a hallucinogenic, other consciousness altering attempt to help them. I think.
But I think this is the point of this conversation: is that this is nuanced.
I knew a guy that thought he was a juice box. He went on a trip one day and believed he was a juice box and never came back. He ended up going to a psych center. We never saw him again.
So when you say a juice box,
was
there a description behind that?
You'd walk past him, and if you touched him, you'd go, "Oh, you spilt me, man."
Yeah,
this guy was completely gone.
Wow.
And I don't know what the specific LSD subject product was he'd taken. I just know he'd taken a tab of trips, and it messed him up forever, and then we never saw him again. And for about 3 weeks, this guy was convinced he was a juice box, and then one day we heard he was taken away. So I think these, but obviously LSD is not the same as what you're talking about, but I think these kind of hallucinogenic drugs
substances
are very, very dangerous, right? It's like there's a particular weed. Do you remember you heard about that lettuce that had a weed in it that made all these people trip?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's actually a weed called Devil's Apple, and on my property, it is on my property. I bought some soil from the local quarry, topsoil, which had come from that market.
Not down at Bulla.
Yeah.
That soil there where they dig.
It came from the market garden. Yeah. So for 2.5 years, I had these devil's apples appearing everywhere. Now, these things, if you eat them, can make you trip and then kill you, right? So, but I hear that they have a hallucinogenic effect. And given the instruction of God, right? So, everything was made for us, so we should just be eating it, right? Why don't you just munch away on them? So I don't think it's a simple answer to either of those scenarios. I don't,
I just want to address something very quickly. Yeah. I think conditions have changed since God made that statement. When he said to Adam and Eve, or even to the animals, I've given every fruit tree
Well,
bearing
but
fruit
just
and seed.
you're not going to turn this into a vegetarian conversation.
No. So we were originally designed to be vegetarians. That's clear from scripture. You know?
I don't
But the
agree.
fall
We had this discussion. I don't agree.
I don't agree with that either.
Sorry.
Do you think animals were supposed to be vegetarian?
No, definitely not.
Okay. So when the fall occurred, all creation fell. So not just human, not just man fell, not morally, like literally, physically, creation fell, you know. So death entered into the world by sin, you know. And the animals actually changed. The fear of man was put into the animals, you know.
Did the animals stop breeding? Was there a certain number on the earth, or did they keep breeding?
So do you understand the conditions of the pre-fallen world?
Yes.
You do understand them?
Yes.
Then you'd be the only one. Because we don't really understand. So Adam and Eve...
Well, when you say I understand them, I know now what you're asking me. When I say I understand preconditions, is that you're asking me, do I understand the nature of how animals populated and how they worked all together? Well, of course not. But what I do understand is that we've got a very large world.
Mm-hmm.
We've got limited space.
Mm-hmm.
We've got reproduction.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got reproduction. So if things were not dying... If in the animal kingdom, if they're not dying, if they're just reproducing, and we had a long period of time, look, it's at what point does the world fill with?
Let me answer your question in a theological.
We've kind of gone down another track.
But you know what is weird though. I have noticed this, which is fascinating. Predators are much smarter than herbivores, right?
Yeah. And prey
significantly smarter. If you've ever tried to hunt a fox or hunt a wild dog, good luck, right? It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
right?
we tried to hunt a tame dog. My sister's dog ran away. This Rottweiler. Oh man, he was really hard to catch.
Hunt a cow, right?
Yeah.
It's not a particularly challenging task.
A bison, yeah.
A bison, yeah. And so I think there's a correlation between intelligence and like a preference for being a carnivore, like a predator or a herbivore. Which speaks to me a lot about vegetarians.
Look, I certainly see where you're going. I see where you're going. Look, all I'm trying to say is that we don't really understand the precondition of the Garden of Eden, of this pre-fallen world. We don't understand the conditions that were at play. You know,
we know it's perfect.
Well, it was not.
But we don't know what perfect means.
Yeah. So to give you a possible answer to your question, there seems to be a finite amount of humans that God had in mind. Not an eternal amount, a finite amount. It seems that way, you know. So when you say, well, we have a lot of space, but, you know, these people, these animals reproduce, maybe there's a finite amount of animals that God had in mind, that once they reach a certain amount, they stop. You know, the fullness of the Gentiles coming in is what's going to bring about, you know, the sort of the very end time, you know.
Speaking of which, have you seen this all of a sudden increase in allergies to eating meat that have just apparently now there's like 500,000, half a million Americans that now can't eat meat. They eat meat and they're allergic to it.
Well, again, that's I mean, when I used to be a dairy farmer, and I know that obviously at times we put penicillin into cows, and so there'd be a certain period of time at which a cow who was on penicillin for various different ailments, she would have to, I think it was 14 days, if that particular cow was going to the abattoir, they would have to be clear for 14 days. If you sent a cow to the abattoir or penicillin got into the milk, so I think it was 7 days on penicillin, then 7 days clear, and then that cow's milk could go in there, and then you had to be, I think it was even longer, it was 28 days, and then they could go to the abattoir.
The holding period, you mean?
Holding periods. Yeah. Holding periods, yeah.
Penicillin's just mushrooms, bro. It's just natural.
It's a fungus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I grow penicillin.
Yeah.
Let's
see, here it is again. I love it. I love his hand.
Wait, but you didn't finish what you were saying. That was getting interesting.
Oh, what was I saying?
No one knows what he was saying, bro. No one knows.
You were a dairy farmer in the holding period. I was talking about the fact that the meat.
Oh yes, yeah. So your line of thinking is that potentially that there's some liberation going on with regards to meats, that people get allergic to it, so we stop eating meat. And I would say maybe that's the truth. Maybe that is the case. I would say within American feedlots, American feedlots in the way that we do. Let's say beef over here is completely different. They have these feedlots where they just feed corn, the gut microbiome, and just the beef over there.
It's terrible.
Is disgusting.
But this is what we know for sure, right? The the people who speak to power in this wonderful world are determined to reduce the amount of meat consumption.
Exactly, 100%.
Right? They want to eliminate cattle farming, and it goes on in part to their insane climate cult. It just seems interesting to me that we all of a sudden, out of the blue, have this new condition where 500,000 Americans have been contaminated with this disease that causes meat allergy by a tick, right, that carries this disease, which has also infected them in a number of regions where this tick doesn't exist. I don't know. Just saying. It seems convenient to me that on the one hand they want to
follow the breadcrumbs.
Yeah,
follow the breadcrumbs.
For me, if I look into Monsanto, right, I actually get very, very concerned. You know, the powers and principalities that run this world are nefarious. They have evil in mind. So nothing for me personally is too wild. You know, I have a very thick tinfoil hat. You know, my sort of previous comment still gives me comfort, though, that this world isn't falling apart. The things that are happening for a reason, and I have found that the Bible has told us why they're happening and what's happening. And you know that, brother. You know that, right?
Well, you know, yes, but I've got to be honest with you. The idea of taking my meat away kind of really, really scares me.
Yeah.
Like, I can handle being locked up again. Right?
Bro, you know I'm a brisket man. All right? They take
That's
my
what
brisket.
I'm talking about.
See, and this is the thing,
Imagine waking up tomorrow and you can't eat meat anymore.
Do you really imagine heaven? And I mean, come on, a banquet feast in heaven with salads. Come on, man.
I don't. Well, you don't. The story is you don't eat, do you? Like you're separated from the physical body.
No,
you know?
No, man.
No, not at all.
There's a lot of eating going on.
No, there's a lot
It's
of
really
eating going
interesting.
on.
So every time Jesus came back after his resurrection, he ate. Every time he said, "Feed me." He had fish on the beach. He had
That's true.
He
You
had
have it in
meat
the
in
new
the upper
earth,
room.
your new body, your the first and second resurrection. Man, we're gonna have a body.
The wedding supper of the Lamb just comes across to me like it's going to be a rager.
I know, but so that's the question: a wedding supper of the Lamb, and you and no meat.
Look, I don't know, brother. I don't know, you know. But what I will say is,
Wait, you don't know whether we're going to eat meat? Is what you're saying?
what I don't know is what we're going to eat. But I suspect we are going to eat. I suspect, you know.
Right.
I suspect it won't be a need. You know, it won't be a need. You know, but I don't really know. What it says is, you know, we have no idea the wonderful things that God has prepared for us.
Cody, come this way to the meat.
If I can't
the
smoke a
next time-
brisket up there.
The next time you come back on this podcast to discuss, I don't know, AI or whatever it is, he's going to be a vegan.
Yeah, man. Miracle meat. Have you heard of it? It's what's that stuff called?
That,
Wonder meat or whatever it is.
You're talking about the artificial stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
full of
The
soy
plant meat.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
So have you seen the articles recently where it's saying like how bad it is?
It's you don't have to be a genius to realize that if you're going to simulate something that is natural, like magic mushies, you're not going to do a good job, right? And the stuff they're putting in there. Oh, what did I read that if you consumed 3 of those burgers a day for 6 weeks, you'd grow tits.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds
This
like
is sounding like Alex Jones, but I mean, there was some truth in it.
There was
man. Alex Jones did an interview
The
recently.
stuff in the
it was
water,
wonderful.
the frogs.
that turned the frogs. JFK or RFK.
He talked about it. He affirmed it.
Yeah, the and it's funny because on my property when I'm spraying the weeds with broadleaf weed spray, it has the same base chemical in it, right? So I know I've doused myself in it, which is why next time I see you guys, I'll be
I was gonna say.
I'll be coming back.
What
as
brow size?
Davina.
If you're wearing
what brow size are you?
if you're wearing lipstick, I'll be offended.
But yeah, it's from what they can tell, it hits you during the development stage. So it's when the child is in the, and you know.
We're seeing a lot more young boys who are effeminate or have got, you know.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, honestly, is so talking about antidepressants, right, and estrogen and stuff. When I consume those things and I go to the toilet, that water is going to the sewage system. The sewage system is processing it. It's not eliminating all the antidepressants in my system. Then my next door neighbor, who's using recycled water, right, is pumping that back on his property. But he's allowed to call it organic, right? And so all these properties
Yeah, I see what you mean.
in the area are getting all this water that's coming through with all these pollutants, and they're dumping it on all of our crops, all this cattle, all the sheep. They're all basically eating grains and feed that have been exposed to these hormones and these chemicals, including all these women that are on the pill, right? And so the extra estrogen that we're all being exposed to. So, that thing that RFK was talking about in terms of turning the frogs gay is interesting, but I think it's a combination.
More there. Yeah. Look, bro, there's so much to talk about, honestly.
There is,
we find on every podcast, all we do is scratch the surface. We never get to the.
We get excited towards the end, don't we?
Well, look, I think do we want to go longer form? I don't know, but we'll see what happens. My desire was to really to understand how you've managed this experience with mental illness that you've had, and it's very clear, bro, that you've had it with externally with your family, with your sister, and with older members of your family, but also personally, you've had your personal experience with it. So thank you for sharing that. It's a personal thing, deeply personal thing. So thank you.
And also to come on kind of semi last minute as well.
Yeah, very last minute.
Yeah, no,
I really appreciate it.
It's nice meeting you guys. And
we
picking me up on the way here. Hey, can you help me? No, my pleasure.
Is that saw you on the side of the road? It's like, hey man,
you want a hungry Jack's
candidate.
burger?
Yeah,
I got a couple of Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Is that still going? Yep. The last thing I'll say is that we always ask people to give us an expression or a rendition of the gospel and what it is. I understand I'm putting you on the spot because you probably aren't used to doing this. But every guest we have on, if they're a Christian and they believe in Christ, I always ask them, what is the gospel? Do you reckon you could give us an explanation of what the gospel is?
Yeah, it's in the best way I possibly can. It's both a societal doctrine and a personal instruction manual. A societal doctrine for systems and processes that make society healthy, strong, and prosperous. An individual doctrine which brings you through the Word, which is the living testament of God, the instruction manual to bring you closer to God through Christ. It's really that simple.
Yeah, that's the good news. Absolutely, closer indeed. I think reconciled unto God through the belief in Jesus.
See, I've always had. We were listening to someone talking about this today. I've always had a Bible in my property, or growing up
in your possession. Yeah.
I as a kid, thought it was rubbish. To be completely honest with you, we get dragged to church and stuff, and hated it. Absolutely despised it. I gave my teachers hell at this Christian school I went to. I knew every intricate question I could throw at them, which would trip them up. And really paid the price for that for a long time. But it's funny how having had it and never really appreciating it, and then you meet these people that are presented with it for the first time ever, that always wanted one but couldn't get one, or was outlawed in their country or whatever, and the blessing that is, I think that's kind of quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great answer.
Yeah, look, I remember when we first met, you shared with me, you said something like, my dad was a godly man and I rebelled against him, and now I've sort of come back around, and it's something I like to share with people. It's like, man, this is a lifelong journey. This isn't a moment in time, and I think when it comes to the gospel specifically, there are people who I've encountered that earnestly say, they're like, I don't know when I was born again. I don't know when I believe the gospel, but I know that I do, and it's been a lifelong testimony, So, yeah, look, bro, thank you for sharing the deep and meaningful things about mental health that you've endured. Can I ask if your faith has helped you as well in regards to dealing with this?
Or what part has that had to play, I guess, is more specific.
Well,
It causes it all.
No. Well, actually, see, this is the dilemma you have, right?
We're here, and here we go back.
No. Sorry,
That's
sorry.
fine.
I'll
It's
try.
fine.
So that this is brilliant meme I saw, which basically I think this summarizes it best. This guy comments, why on earth do you follow that rubbish man-made sky fairy religion? And the guy responds, and he says, well, if it was made by man, why did he make it so damn hard? Right? Because if you were going to do everything that felt good and was desirable and all that sort of stuff, you wouldn't write a Bible like this. You'd have to be a narcissist, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, when you live a lifestyle that is in contradiction to the Bible, so when you're hanging with bad guys and you're doing bad things and you have no respect for anyone except yourself and you're happy to burn down the world, and when you are living that kind of life, you are always looking over your shoulder waiting for someone to take you out, right? You're always wondering, if I get in the car tomorrow, is someone going to be there with a knife? You always wonder when you open the door, is there going to be another run through, right? So the advantage of knowing God, or at least doing your best to adhere to the rules, is that you live a far more peaceful, complete, and loving life. And all those demons that follow you normally in the world separated from that ideology tend to disappear. If I didn't know Christ, if I didn't know the Bible, I think I would be a pretty bad person.
Yeah, fair enough. As in a bad way or a bad person?
As in both.
Yeah.
Right.
Me too. Me too. Jason's just a bad person and in a bad way. And he knows Christ.
I'll tell you what.
Well, look, bro, thank you. We'll end it here, and I'd like to, I'd like you on again at some time in the future, so we can have more of a discussion.
Next time we can discuss AI.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, that's real exciting.
That's a deep topic, and one that still threads itself somewhat into some of the parts of the discussions we've
Actually,
had.
it threads itself into everything.
Yeah,
threads itself into everything. Yeah. So I probably enjoyed this podcast a lot more than some others because we had some good, fervent, respectful disagreement. That's what it's all about. Learning. Sharing ideas.
Did you learn?
I did. And I'm sick of this cough, though.
Yeah. Did you want me to sign us off?
I'm not going to get rid of it for this podcast, so keep it in there.
Well, I'll sign us off then.
Oh, sign us off.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Fringe Frequencies. I hope it's been a good time. Join us again. Thank you.
Take care.